Hi, can we hear me? I hope. Great. I'm Patsy and I'm an alcoholic. Um, because of my higher power and the fellowship of AA, I have not found it necessary to take a drink since August 19th, 1973. So I'm somewhere in a 49th plus year of sobriety. Um, I'm very nervous tonight, so forgive that, as I am an actor by profession. So I should be cooler than I'm being right now. What it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. Well, I was born 82 years ago today. So I'm 82 today. My real birthday is August 19th, 1973, for the years that count. I was born as a much departed AA friend of mine, a female, used to say many years ago when there weren't many females in meetings. And she was an Irish Catholic, as I am, and or non-pro. But anyway, I used to start when I used to speak early in my recovery. I would say, I'm a member of the CIA, Catholic, Irish, alcoholic. And this poor woman, who was also Catholic, Irish, and alcoholic, told this story later. She said, when I first came to these meetings, every man who got up would declare with full voice, I'm Catholic, I'm Irish, and I'm alcoholic. And I used to sit there thinking, Lord, let the next guy who gets up be a Protestant. So, well, you got an Irish Catholic tonight, or at least that's how I was born. My father's from Cork. My mother's from Mayo. My entire family are alcoholic. My father was drunk all the time. My mother did not drink much in the early stages. As she retired, she did. They fought all the time, and I felt like I didn't belong. I listened to the wonderful woman last week, and she talked about something. We all say we share many things, and we're very unique in our alcoholism. She said something that struck me. We all of us feel isolated in some way, shape, or form. We just don't fit in. I didn't feel like I belonged. I talked like this, for example, because my parents talked like this. So I went to the local school, Our Lady of Victory, where the Italian boys said, oh, we'll take care of this guy. So I went home and started listening to the radio. It's 1947, hoping I could learn to speak American English, not the Irish thing I was speaking. And so I taught myself really to speak announcer English. And probably the reason I got into showbiz. Anyway, my father was gone most of the time. When I was born, he had coal black hair. He was dark Irish, black Irish, we called him. The Armada has a lot to answer for. He had black hair, olive skin, brown eyes, and so did his sister, my aunt, who will play a unique part in my story. And so when I was born, my mother was from Mayo and was what you would typically call Irish, round face, red hair, blazing. And that's what I looked like, red hair, blazing. And my father, who looked a lot like Clark Gable, there will date myself. Anyway, he said to the doctor, where did the boy get the red hair? The doctor said, well, he didn't get it off the grass. So I guess that answered that. He was not happy. So my father went on a 3-week drunk because of my red hair. He came back in time, though, to make sure I didn't get circumcised, which I won't go into at great length, but thanks, Dad. That worked out just fine. No. So that was his contribution. Then he went off to Ireland to die. He used to do that every year. He would announce later, of course, I didn't believe a word he said, which was good on my part. But when I was born, he went off to Ireland to die. Then he joined the armed forces to stay away from me, was my thought. And he served in the South Pacific. When he came back, I was 3, and 1944. And we lived in one of those row homes in Philadelphia and Baltimore, where you share a wall with the people next door. They call them condos now, but you still hear your neighbors pee. But in any event, we were in these row homes. And so I was in the living room. I'll never forget this. I've been a lot of years in therapy, so I remember a lot of things. And we had a wind-up Victrola. And I used to love country and Western music. So it's a good thing I'm living in Tennessee, I think, or I lived in Louisiana. And so in any event, I loved country and Western music. And I was listening to Gene Autry sing Red River Valley. And I'm sorry, I had throat cancer 22 years ago. So my voice is gone as a singer. But anyway, I'd be singing Red River Valley. And then into the house came this strange man who I didn't know who he was, really. Turns out he was my father. And he said, "What are you doing, boy?" I said, "Singing, sir." I'm looking around to see if somebody will cue me into who it is. He said, "Well, if you're going to be singing songs, you should sing some good ones." So he picked me up, carried me upstairs, set me on the toilet, which later on I saw is very significant. And then he taught me 5 Irish songs: The Rose of Tralee, Danny Boy, The Boys from the County Cork, The Irish Soldier Song, and Galway Bay. Can remember them. If I could sing now, I'd sing some of them. So, not wanting to have wasted an hour and a half, there were churches and bars on every corner in Philadelphia. So my father, having been a father for 5 minutes or an hour and a half, decided to make some money out of it. So he carried me into the nearest bar, and there were 7 Irishmen shellacked to the bar, and he puts me down on the bar, and he drank shots and beers. If you were Polish, they were Boilermakers. If you were Irish, they had another name for them. Anyway, he drank shots and beers, 45 cents, I can remember. And he got one, drank, and he looked at me and he said, "All right, boy, start singing." "Oh, the pale moon was rising above." So I'm singing away, and the old Irishmen wake up and they go, "Give that man a drink." "Wait a minute, he's too young. Give his old man a drink." So my father I knew 5 songs. So my father got 5 shots, 5 beers, and then we went to the next bar. So I always wanted to become famous enough. It never happened. But I wanted to become famous enough to go on, Jimmy Kimmel or one of those shows and tell that story, because everybody has a wonderfully meaningful story about how they got started. I was hustled for drinks. That's how I got into showbiz. So my aunt, my father's sister, thought this was low class, I guess. So she put me on a show called the Horn and Heart Children's Hour. So from 1946 until 1950, I was the Irish singer. Children entertainers were the last gasp of vaudeville. And so every Sunday on radio first and then on TV, I would sing an Irish song. And we had a Jewish singer and an Italian singer, and we had ethnic kind of singers. And I kept doing that. Meanwhile, I'm going to Catholic school, and I'm very impressed. I want to be a priest. I've got pictures of me all over as the guy who's going to be a priest. Unfortunately, my parents never went to church. Now, for 2 devout Catholics, even drunk, he was that. They didn't go to church, and I couldn't, for the lie later on, I figured out why, but in any event, I felt weird about that. So here we are. I'm isolated, first of all, by the Italians who don't like my brogue, and then I'm isolated by my parents who aren't going to church. And by the time I was 8, I was serving mass in the Latin tradition every day at 6:30 in the morning. On it went and on it went. And all the time, I didn't start drinking until I got to college. And so I was struggling all this time. And then finally, when I turned 11, I thought, so my mother turned to me, and she was a hardworking woman. She was indentured to the Catholic Church. This is not legal, but you think the church cares? They don't. So she was indentured at age 15 in Ireland. And then they shipped her out, paid for her passage, third class, to go to the main line in Philadelphia, where she scrubbed floors for 5 years to get her citizenship. My father, meanwhile, escaped Ireland because he was in the IRA. He was born in 1902, and in 1916, he ran guns into Connell Square and ammunition. So he was escaping from the Brits. So they both met later on in Philly and practiced what I consider to be Irish birth control. They dated for 11 years and then made a mistake, and here I sit. So I'm an only child, and with parents who don't go to church in spite of being devout Catholics. So then when I was 10 or 11, my mother said, just think, boy, excuse me, when you get to 16, you can quit school and I'll get you a job as a busboy here in the restaurant I work in. And I thought, what part of me looks like busboy is sort of where I'm going here exactly. And so I thought, I got to get out. I got a drunk father who's going back to Ireland to die every year till they throw him out again. I got a mother who's working and I never see and wants me to become a busboy. So my aunt, my father's sister, couldn't have children. So I went to her and I said, I need to move in with you. And she said, fine. So I became her kid. And I moved in at age 11 and I stayed there until I left for grad school in 1963. And again, to keep this story a little shorter, because I've mostly gone over today how wonderful my recovery has been in almost 50 years. Needless to say, now let's start the drinking. I go to LaSalle College. I'm scared. I don't like anybody. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be anywhere. Oh, here is I think, an interesting story. I had very high grades. I had a 1400 SAT score, which in 1959 was high. So I got into Princeton as well as LaSalle College. And so I went to Princeton to see about going.
What are you doing? Don't take me out of that meeting.
Hello.
Hello. So, sorry. Anyway. Who do we have with us here, folks? Hello? Is that somebody coming in on my?
No, go ahead, Patrick. I got
Okay, sorry. Appreciate that. Sorry. Anyway, so I go to Princeton and we sit down to lunch and there's 2 forks next to the plate. And I think, what is the second fork for? And I got into Princeton and I didn't go because I didn't know what the second fork was for. So you want to talk about someone who felt totally isolated from his own being, it was me. So I go to LaSalle where I'm comfortable, all Italians or Irish or Polish, and they're all Catholics. And I didn't know so I got involved in theater there. And then I met this guy who was head of the French department, Dr. Guichard, and he liked me a lot and sort of began to mentor me. I had a lot of mentors at LaSalle. And he invited me to this party. And I was scared again, as I always was. And I go to this party and somebody says, I'm 18. Somebody says, would you like a drink? I thought, oh, Christ, my father was a drunk. My aunt is drinking 3 gallons of wine a week rather. And everybody's, I don't want to drink. So they said, well, we could have a martini, you could have whiskey sour. Oh, my father was drinking shots and beers. My aunt was drinking wine out of the bottle. So I thought, well, maybe it's the kind of drinking I'm afraid of. So I said, yes, I'd like bourbon on the rocks. I thought that sounded kind of mature. And so they gave me a Jim Beam on the rocks, 2 of them in the evening. And I don't remember anything that happened. So my very first drunk was a blackout at 18. So the next day I go to school and a bunch of people who were at the party came up and said, God, you were funny last night. You were really funny. We thought you were great. I thought, really? I was funny? Wow. So it's the kind of drinking I need to get into. By 19, I was drinking between 2 and 4/5 of whiskey a day. I would get up in the morning, and of course, it was illegal to drink. Nobody cares who's an addict. I had bottles everywhere I needed them, and I would just drink. And I'd go to school, and I had a big styrofoam cup, and it would be filled with black coffee and whiskey, and I'd have a kid in front of me going, what the hell are you drinking? I've got here a little coffee that's quite exciting. Really, it's alcohol. Yeah, well, it's a little bit. He said, well, you shouldn't be doing that. I said, well, I'm getting an A in here. What are you getting? So now I begin my justification of the drinking. I drank all through college. I was legendary at the school for considering there were a lot of drunks. And when I graduated, cum laude, Brother Robert, the dean, said in front of 6,000 people, now graduating cum laude, Patrick C. We never knew Pat drank until one day we saw him sober. And I thought that was the best thing anybody had ever said about me. Well, I did what a lot of women did in those days. I was afraid to leave the world, so I got married. So at 22, I married a poor, well, she was 18, but going on 40. She had an IQ of 168. She said, I'm marrying you for 2 reasons. Nietzsche tells me I should. And the other reasons are you can outact me and you can outdrink me. And I'm going to steal both of those from you. Well, we stayed married for 2 years and she never stole any of that. I could still outact her and outdrink her, and she left me, wisely so. So now I go to grad school at Tulane in New Orleans. And now I begin the pattern of quitting before they throw me out. And so I did a lot of shows there. And eventually they sent me to an audition in Chicago where I got into a equity, that's the union, actors union, in Memphis, Tennessee. And so I go to Memphis, I'm doing shows there, and I'm drunk all the time. I'm drunk on stage. But back in that era, we're talking 1964, 65. We've got assassinations, the Kennedys, Martin Luther King Jr. Seemed not that important to anyone, including me. And so one day, though, I woke up on Front Street, that's where the theater was, in Memphis, and I was surrounded by matches, 200 matches burnt. And I woke up and I thought, oh my God, I tried to set fire to myself. I better fix this. So I went to my first AA meeting in Memphis, Tennessee. What always struck me as interesting is all the drunks I knew were Irish Catholic, mostly, and all the meetings were in Baptist churches. I never quite understood how that worked. So this was in a Baptist church down a holler. And I go up and I'm scared. I'm 23 years old. I know I'm a drunk. I always knew I was a drunk. That was never a problem for me. So there's a guy standing outside the meeting and he's got a stump where his arm used to be. And I said, excuse me. And when I get nervous, my voice cracks, even now at 82. He said, excuse me, sir, this the AA meeting? He said, yeah, what do you want, boy? I said, well, I thought I might come to the meeting. They weren't very happy in those days about people wanting to stop early. And so he said, you see this stump? I thought, now what do I say to that? That's a beautiful stump. I've never seen a stump quite like that. I didn't know what to say. So if I said, yes, I see this stump. He said, well, I was on a sterno drunk on Beale Street, and I was putting cigarettes out on my arm. When they found me, they cut my arm off. You still think you've got a problem, boy? I said, well, maybe not that one. Anyway, I went to the meeting and I made my first AA error. I will make 3 errors in the course of my journey. I met a guy, I was 23. The next youngest person in the meeting was 38 and had an MF degree in theater from UTK. I latched onto him. I thought, well, if he stays sober, I'll stay sober. So I put personalities immediately ahead of the program. So he stayed sober and I stayed sober for 58 days. And then I was with him and he asked a woman in AA to marry him and she wisely said no. And so he bought 2 bottles of vodka. He walked a couple of miles and I'm crying and screaming, don't drink, please don't drink. And he gets a flop house on Beale Street for 50 cents, drinks the first fifth, starts the second and drops dead of a heart attack. So I went down to the desk and said, call the police. The guy up there is dead. And they came and they took him away. And I went out and did what any alcoholic would do. I got a bottle of whiskey and got drunk. And so then I went on an 11-year slip. I drank for the next 11 years, and mostly I just kept trying to escape. I went back to Philadelphia before they fired me in Front Street. I got a job teaching at Temple University because I had degree training from Tulane. And I had to quit there in 1970 because I was drinking my way out. And by now it was no longer even remotely romantic. You know, I drank in the time of Richard Burton, Peter O'Toole, Richard Harris. It somehow seemed very wonderful somehow. It wasn't. It was painful. It was god-awful. So then I was offered a job in a Neil Simon play in Philadelphia. And I took it and I couldn't get sober or drunk. I was sitting in the bar drinking Manhattans, nothing. So I thought, I've got to fix. So I went to my next AA meeting. So I went and I got, again, 58 days seemed to be my number of sobriety. And I thought, well, this is what I'll do. I'll just get sober every once in a while and go back to doing what I'm doing. And so, and now the mistake I made for all of you who are learning how to stay sober, I'm a living legend for you. I put personalities ahead of the principles, bad advice. And now I put sobriety third. Oh, I'm sober now. I got this show. I'm doing great. They offered me a leading role in a theater in Jacksonville, Florida. Everybody in AA saying, don't do it, don't go. And I thought, no, are they kidding? This is a big deal here. And so I took it. I called AA in Jacksonville. I said, I'm coming down. I expect you'll be waiting. And they were very kind. And so I was there. I did a play with Betty Grable. I did a play with Dorothy Lamour. And I'm sober until Christmas Eve, 58 days sober. And the producer of the theater gave cufflinks and earrings to people. And to me, who had not had a drink in 58 days, he gives me a bottle of Jack Daniels. So I looked at the Jack Daniels. I took it back to my motel. I put it up on the bureau. And it was like, I'm a Catholic, not practicing, but all of a sudden it was Our Lady of the Jack. And I'm just looking at it. And as dawn creeped out of the window, I drank it. I drank the whole fifth. And then I went on the worst 11 months of my life. I got the DTs. I was on stage with Artie Johnson from Laugh-In. We were doing a play, and all of a sudden I'm standing there. I'm playing his psychiatrist, and I'm standing there, and I've got rats coming out of my eyes and roaches coming out of my nose. I know they're not real, but they're real to me. I don't know if anybody's had the DTs. They're not fake to you. They're the real McCoy. So I thought, I got to get away from the rats and the roaches. So I walked away, and you're not supposed to change your blocking on stage. You're supposed to stay where you are. And so I moved away, and I got rid of the roaches and the rats. But now I'm in the middle of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and Eugene Ormandy is directing. And I'm going nuts here. I literally am going nuts. So I left the stage, and I left. They fired me. I left. I don't know. And I got back to Philly. I got arrested 3 times in the month I was back for drunk and disorderly. And the judge says, the next time I see you, college boy, I'm going to put you in county for 60 days. I thought, this isn't good. So I found 3 med students at Jefferson Hospital who thought I was cute. I don't mean sexually. They just thought I was cute. And so they had a big house in downtown Philadelphia. And they had parents who used to come with money and cakes. And they wanted the money, didn't care much for the cakes. But they thought if they let me live with them, I could scare their parents away and they could just keep the money. So they put me up in the basement. And sure enough, I mean, I look like I'm now 170 pounds. In my last month of drinking, I was 270. So I'm 100 pounds more than I am now. I'm bleeding from any opening that wants to bleed. And so I'm in the basement. I have a cot down there and booze. And if a parent came over, they said, Pat, come upstairs. Hey, you must be Jeremy's mother. You're a cute little woman. Please, I'll have a piece of that cake. I'm sorry with you. So anyway, they ran screaming out of the house, left the money. And 2 of the guys went into alcohol rehabilitation as doctors, which I thought was pretty good choice. So anyway, I'm in their house, and it's 11 o'clock in the morning. And I was always been a big fan of soaps as an audience. I loved watching Guiding Light, General Hospital, Young and the Restless. So I was watching one of the many soaps that are long since gone, and it's 11 o'clock in the morning. And as I say, I'm 280 pounds, blubber. And I'm drinking, and the booze is just rolling down me. And I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, and I said, and I did something I swore I'd never do. Ray Milland and Lost Weekend. I swore I'm never going to throw good whiskey down a sink, because then I got to go buy it again. So I had 3/4 of a bottle, and I said, God, we're at a bad place here. I tried to slash my wrists many years ago. That didn't work. I stood on subway platforms, thought about what would it take to jump. Didn't have the guts. And here I am. And I can't. I can't do this anymore. So you have a choice. You can kill me, which should be fine with me, or you can help. You can take this away. So I went in the kitchen and I poured the whiskey down the sink. And I thought, well, this is the last shot. So I walked a couple of miles to the AA clubhouse. And I've worked very hard to make this story PG-13. It's generally XXXR, but I'm going to use the F word now because it doesn't work any other way. I walked into the meeting reeking of alcohol. And they weren't very kind in those days about people, really. Yeah, requirement was the desire to stop drinking, but they didn't want you stinking of alcohol. They didn't want me. And I walked in, and this guy was standing on the door. He said, "Shut the fuck up, sit the fuck down, or I'll throw you the fuck out." And I did. I sat down. And that was my first of almost 50 years of AA meetings. I didn't make any of them. My analyst once said, "You may be screwed up, but you're not stupid." And so I stopped making the same mistakes. I put the principles of the program ahead of the people there. I'd go to a lot of meetings and I'd think, well, I've been to college, graduate school, these people are, and I used to say to myself, well, if you're so smart, how come you're drunk? And so I got over whatever ego I was carrying around because I wanted what you folks had and I didn't have. And I went to 3 meetings a day for my first year of sobriety. I called my sponsor who had sponsored me several years earlier. He's got 57 years now. He lives in Laguna Beach, Lance C. And I called Lance and I said, I've been to 16 meetings in the last week and it's Sunday and I don't drive, you know that. I need to get to a meeting. He said, God, he said, I knew you when you drank. On Sunday when the bars were closed in Philly, you got to New York, you know how to get a drink. You know how to get a drink, you know how to get to a goddamn meeting. And hung up on me. And he was right. What I didn't need was any helping hand at that issue. I had to keep working my own program. And so I did get to a meeting. I could have gotten a drink and I did get to a meeting. And I went to 3 meetings a day for a year. I was offered a tour as Tevyev in Fiddler on the Roof. I turned it down because I couldn't tour and stay sober. I was then offered a tour with Sherry Spillane, Mickey Spillane's widow, in a show, and I turned it down. And when you turn people down, they don't call you anymore. That's how my business worked. But I didn't care. I knew now that if sobriety wasn't first, and if principles weren't ahead of personalities, this wasn't never going to work. And I couldn't afford to go back to where I was in that building in Philadelphia with that bottle in my hand, feeling like death seemed like just such a beneficial statement. I didn't want to go back there. And almost 50 years sober, I don't want to go back there. I wake up every day with the daily ponderables, which is a great way to start the day. And I go through those and I find many things that, enabled me to, excuse me, to get through the day and then go to meetings when I can. And anyway, when I got a year sober, I want to share a couple of, how are we time-wise? I'm not paying any attention. 10 minutes? Okay, great. Because I skipped one thing. I tried not to make my drunkalog more interesting than it was. It was interesting. I lived it. But I had a tendency early in my sobriety to want to romanticize my drinking and make it seem somehow more interesting than it was. And I swore tonight I wouldn't do that. But I did miss a very major thing that I think I need to step back on. I hadn't seen my father. This is in the end stages of my drinking. I hadn't seen my father in 10 years. And I'm in a bar. And at the end of the bar, I hear this voice. He says, Joe, is that you? Now, why did my father call me Joe when my name is Patrick? That would be fodder for another story. But in any event, he called me Joe. He was the only one who did. My name is Patrick Joseph C. And he was Patrick Joseph C. So my aunt decided I was a Joey, that I was cute and a Joey. And he said, when he went on a 3-week drunk over that. Anyway, fade out. I see him in a bar after 10 years. And he said, do you have a place nearby? No, I haven't seen the man in 10 years. I said, yeah, I'm living with 2 guys in a house around the corner. He said, oh, I'm with a widow lady. It's not working out for me. Could I move in with you? I said, yeah, sure. So drunk son takes drunk dad home to the boys. And he stayed with us for about 6 months. About 4 months in, he was covered in his own excrement, and I carried him to the hospital. Then I went back and got him and brought him home. And then 2 months later, the same deal. So I took him to the hospital, and the orderlies wouldn't, he stank, they wouldn't touch him. So I took him to the basement of Temple Hospital and hosed him down. And then I carried him upstairs, and they put him in bed. Next day I came back, and he said, Joe, you got to get me out of here. These people want me to go to an AA meeting. I'm not an alcoholic, you know that. I said, Pop, you've done a lot of terrible things in your life. And one of the things you're doing now is ruining my drinking. So I tell you what, the next time I see you, I want to see you crushed by a bus. I want every bone in your body broken. I want you lying in the street with a broken sack of bones in you. And that's when I'll talk to you. And I left. So he went to live with a Jewish friend of mine named Danny. And Danny called me and said, your father hasn't had a drink in 3 weeks. I said, I don't care. I want nothing to do with this man. So at 3 months, Danny calls me again. Your dad's still living with me and he hasn't had a drink. I said, I'm going to live to regret this. I said, give me another month. So he never took another drink is the end of that story. So the 12th step work on my father required, I was the last person dealing with him, as it turns out. And I told him I wanted him dead. And then he stopped drinking. And as my sponsor said to me, you knew how to get a drink on Sunday when the bars were closed. I'm not taking you anywhere. Sometimes helping people is making sure they do it themselves and not carrying them along. So my father was sober for 11 years. I drank for a couple more, but we had 8 sober years together. And that was quite an extraordinary experience. Anyway, with a year of sobriety, I had look, even at almost 50 years, a day at a time, I still want to drink. I'm an alcoholic. It'd be ridiculous. Oh, I bet you don't. Are you kidding? I mean, not drinking is not normal for me. And so do I suffer the way I did? Well, I'll tell you about the last time I really suffered. I was 13 months sober. I had turned down all work and now I'm running out of money. So, but I didn't want to put money first. So I thought, well, I was offered a Broadway audition. So I went up to New York to audition. I was lousy because I was way out of shape. And I didn't get the job. And I walked into McSorley and I ordered 3 double shots and 3 backup beers. I'm 13 months sober. And I don't know whether I sat there for 5 minutes or an hour. It didn't matter to the bartender. I paid for it. And I just looked at them. And then I started crying. I was so terrified. I ran out of the bar. I ran to the train station, got a train back to Philly. And I went to a meeting. And that was the last god awful moment. I was out with my son in Southampton one summer, and we went into a restaurant bar, and the only place they had was at the bar. And I said to my son, I said, we're going to have to go somewhere else. I said that this isn't going to work for me. And so we did. And so I went to LA after a year of sobriety, almost two. And life was good. I met my second wife, who was on Happy Days and Wonder Woman. And we got married. We had two kids, James and Charlie, both of them who are now 40, 41. And I had a very good career while I was there. I was on Seinfeld and Star Trek and a lot of stuff, and I had a good time. To coach my kids' baseball team, stayed sober, went to meetings all the time. It was tricky in LA because a lot of the people in LA meetings were on coke, and I'm an alk. I drank. I never did coke or pot or heroin. I did alk. So it's tricky being around people whose addiction is somewhere else. But again, you listen for what you need. I've never been to a bad meeting. I've always found something. It's like pizza. Even Domino's is not bad. And so anyway, I had a good career, stayed sober, went to lots of meetings, met lots of wonderful people. I remember chairing a meeting and a very famous sober celebrity came up after the meeting in Pacific Palisades and said, "You were wonderful tonight." I said, "Oh, thank you." And my kind of sponsor, a guy named Tom Bishop, who was from PR at Warner Brothers, came up and he said, "The last time she liked somebody like you, he ended up opening for her in Vegas." Well, that didn't happen, but it was still a nice compliment. So my AA remained strong. My wife died at 51 of lung cancer, leaving me with a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old. So we get dealt stuff, folks. We get dealt stuff. And so I didn't quite know what to do. When she was diagnosed, my mortgage was $145,000. The day she died, my mortgage was $395. So that's how I lived. I kept taking money out of the house. Anyway, she died, and I had a friend who was teaching in Tennessee at ETSU. And it's his birthday today as well. In fact, we talked for a while. And he said, "Why don't you come teach for me?" I taught for him years ago. And I said, "Yeah, sure, I guess." So I came to Tennessee, which after 25 years of living in LA and New York, was really quite a shocker. So I never heard the expression, "What church do you go to?" until I got here. And so, but my sons came with me. I met a beautiful woman who is now my wife. And she's just a joy to me and my sons. And I had two stepchildren. My stepson is a first lieutenant in the Army and just came back from Poland. My stepdaughter is an actor, has got her MFA, and my two boys, my older son is a book reader on Audible, and my younger son is a food and beverage manager at 21C in Louisville. So anyway, there's my story. Almost 50 years sober, 49 and a half years. I'm going to spend, just as my father went back to Ireland to die every year, and he never got lucky. He died in my arms screaming for his mother. And that's a whole other story. But in any event, I'm going back to Ireland. I spent 4 months in Ireland, and I did a play in Cork. And I made a lot of, and there's an AA meeting, if you're ever in Cork, on Patrick's Hill, noon and night. It's just, I've been to great meetings in New York, great meetings in LA, great meetings in Philly. I got sober in Philly. And at Mustard Seed in a Baptist church. And but this meeting in Ireland is an amazing place. And the Irish drunk sober are so much more wonderful than Irish drunks drunk. And so I'm going to spend my 50th birthday at AA in Cork. So there I am. Thank you for listening.